All right, hello, Carolina Preps fans. My tour of talking to coaches during the spring continues. Sometimes I'm on the road, sometimes I'm not, depending on where I've got to go and who I'm talking to. But I'm talking to Perquimans head football coach Ian Rapanick. Coach, I've known you for a while. You've been at Perquimans twice now. You went back up to Virginia, coached some, and came back. So you've had an interesting journey. But I appreciate you coming on today and talking about your team, kind of getting everybody up to speed with your program and just catching up with you.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Like I told you before we started, it's great to have you back around here. It's been back at Perquimans for 3 years now and really been enjoying it. So happy to be back around here. Family's happy to be back. So it's been a good 3 years for sure.
There's not a county in this state I've not been to, and really not a high school except for maybe one or two new ones that I haven't been to. And I've been to Perquimans a couple times. I've taken some photos of the stadium. I mean, that's a neat. I mean, that's a small, that Hertford community. That's a small little town, but it's really unique. Kind of the way the water kind of cuts in and out of there, and the stadium, and the history with Catfish Hunter and just everything. That's a neat place.
Absolutely. We love it. It's special. I kind of tell everybody, because a lot of people say, well, there's not much there and all that stuff. And, I grew up in Southeast Virginia. I went to Hickory High School. So we were kind of on the edge of being fairly rural. And then, obviously we came down here with it being 45 minutes from, my family, my wife's family, still close enough to where, we can go home on the weekends and stuff like that whenever we need to or want to. But it's a special place. I tell everybody, on Friday night, so there isn't much any place that I've been that's gives you the same kind of feeling as here. We have a fire truck comes out and puts up the American flag with a pirate flag underneath it. We got people all around the fence, and the bleachers are full, and our band's done a really good job the past couple of years, and it's been awesome. I absolutely love it. I think it's a very, very special place, and like I said, we're happy to be back here.
Now, it's been a minute since I've been to a game or been on campus, but if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, but do you have a cemetery right there behind your stadium?
So when we were playing out behind or in the outfield of the baseball field, we did. We built a new stadium, I want to say 5 years ago. That's right across the street from the school.
Okay, well, I need to get up there then. I got every reason to come see you then. I got to get some pictures.
We'd love to have you. And it's top notch, first class. I think, and everybody kind of says it, but facility wise across the board, all the sports, I don't know if there's anything better than what we have. And, obviously there's a lot to maintain. The community expects quality facilities. They expect, a beautiful playing surface, whether it be football, softball, baseball. Our gym just got redone. Weight room has gotten a lot of upgrades over the last couple of years. So we want to put a product out there, whether it be in sports or in the weight room or whatever the case is, that everybody can be proud of and take a lot of pride in. And, like I said, it's a lot of work, but it makes it even more special.
No question. I mean, the more work you put into anything, cultivating it from the ground up and putting your blood, sweat, and tears and just a lot of pride and passion into it, it's obviously going to yield better results. And, it's good to hear these stories because, that's why I cover high school football. It's more to me than just the X's and O's. It's just the community. And, football bonds to communities like no other. And, I like hearing those stories.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. We're not necessarily to the extent of like Texas where, stores are shutting down and stuff like that on Friday night. But, like I said, I put our atmosphere on Friday night up there with anywhere I've been. And, being in Virginia, and I coached 5A ball at Norview, and, been to 6A schools and stuff like that. And, it's a more quote unquote intimate setting as far as what we have. But, when the lights come on and we come out, it's special.
Yeah. Here's a little trivia question that probably very few people, if anybody, knows other than maybe my family. Kannapolis, North Carolina, in the center of the state's my hometown, and, I proudly represent that town. I was born in Portsmouth, Virginia. My mom was in the Navy. My dad was in the Marine Corps. So I spent my first 6 months or 9 months of life up there.
Small world, huh? That's crazy. I didn't
Sure
know
is.
that.
Sure is. It's not really something you go out and say born so and so. I never really lived there, but I was born there at the Naval Hospital, so kind of cool to have that little connection.
Absolutely. That's really cool.
Yes, sir. Well, hey, you had a great year last year, and I'm just going to pull it up here on the screen. We got our CarolinaPreps.com team pages. Anybody can go check them out, and got the one right here for Perquimans. And you can always check on your coaching record, but there you see it right there. You guys had a very solid 8-4 season. Unfortunately, you ran into a really good Warren County team there in the playoffs, but you guys had some great games. I even looked at that game you guys played against Tarboro earlier in the year. And you guys, I think you guys had a lot of good talent there in the program this year.
Yeah, absolutely. We're losing some key parts to what we do, or what we've done, I should say. Obviously, losing what, in my opinion, is the best quarterback, and for sure in 1A, and one of the best in the state. All those parts that we're losing will hurt, but finding what we do best now, and understanding, as a high school football coach, we have to make changes and we have to adjust from year to year, scheme wise and things like that. But we're excited about the future. We're excited about this team. We start spring ball today, so I'm really looking forward to that and getting back with the guys, and finding out what the 2025 Perquimans football team is going to look like.
I talked to Coach Biggie this week up at Gates and I asked him the same question. I'll ask you, realignment, shuffled a few things up, moving up to an 8A classification instead of the traditional 1 through 4. I believe you guys are still at 2, and you're in that same conference with Gates and I think Manio and a few of the other teams. How do you feel about the realignment and what it can do for your program?
We're really excited about it. I know Coach Biggie mentioned that it's really good for all sports, and you look at even football specifically. I think all of the teams, obviously I have a huge amount of respect for Tarboro and Coach Craddock and, what they've done there. And I tell everybody that they're the standard in Northeast North Carolina. The way they do things, the community buy-in that they have, and, all that stuff is something that I think all of us are kind of trying to work towards. But, as far as with our new conference, I think that there's going to be really top to bottom. I think that everybody is really solid. There isn't necessarily going to be a week that we can just kind of go into and, think that we're stepping on the field better than a team. But geographically, obviously, it makes a ton of sense too. Travel wise, it's great. We're excited to be playing Edenton again. We're excited to be able to keep playing Camden and all those schools. And, obviously a lot of familiar faces as far as coaches and programs and things like that. But I was telling somebody the other day, with scheduling non-conference games, I was just like, everybody, all the coaches that I know and I talk to down here are in our conference now. So that part of it was interesting, but, we're really excited about it. Looking forward to the challenge of what the new conference brings. But I think across the board in all sports, it's going to make it, it's going to make all of us, we're going to have to bring it every single game. And, we're, as all of our, our athletic department in general, we're all really excited about it.
I know spring ball is just kicking off, so you're still trying to build your team for this year. But how do you feel about your 20 squad and who maybe some of those young guys that's kind of creeping in the weeds that might come out there and establish themselves and kind of become that well-known quarterback or next playmaker for the Pirates?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, and like I kind of got to a little while ago, losing the quarterback, losing some leaders on our team. We kind of look at it as a blessing and a curse. We're going to get into what I think Perquimans football should be. And we got away from it the last couple of years because we had a kid that could sit back there and throw the ball 35 times a game and we were going to be okay. But we're really preaching grit. We're really preaching, kind of a blue collar mindset, which really what embodies our community. So we're excited about that. I think, scheme wise, we're finding what we can do well. I think we're going to put ourselves in a position to really be successful and not put as much pressure on the quarterback. But with that being said, I think, some of the young guys that we have coming, I'm thinking that Benjamin Brown is going to make the transition from receiver to quarterback, but we have a couple guys who are going to be sophomores that we think have a shot to be able to do it as well. Benjamin being one of the top receivers in the state, I don't want to make that move unless we absolutely have to. So we're going to look at the sophomores and, through the spring, since he's playing baseball, and see what they can do. Evan Conway started at receiver for us last year, and he's going to have a lot bigger of a role this year. Amos Fletcher is another kid who played corner for us who had a pretty good year at corner, but we had a lot of depth at receiver last year, so he didn't play a ton at receiver, but he's another one. Tavion White, who started towards the end of the season at running back, but mostly at inside linebacker. Looking to see him a lot more on offense this year. Keyshawn Foreman was all region, all conference at corner. He's probably going to have a pretty big year for us at running back as well. And then up front, we're returning, in my opinion, one of the best left tackles in 1A, which obviously will be 2A, and Sam Lane, who's a 3-year starter for us and, has been consistently the best offensive lineman we've had. Stephen Elliott on the defensive side of the ball at D-end was an all-conference, all-region guy as well. Like I said, it's a blessing and a curse in the sense that you're losing, a lot of leadership, I think, on our team, but really looking forward to seeing some of these young guys kind of step up and go from being good players to, being leaders of our program.
I've listened to you talk about some of them guys that I know are some bona fide college prospects, at some level or not. And, I've talked to Coach Moore up at Northeastern quite a bit, and he and I have had this running conversation, as have I with Coach McGill down in Martin County and some of the other guys in the area, that it's just so hard still outside of, some of the local schools like Elizabeth City State and Chowan and some of the Eastern-based schools to get college recruiters and coaches up to that part of the state, just given the proximity. And it's like you could have a guy right there in Hertford who is the same caliber of kid that maybe you coached when he was up there in the Chesapeake, Norfolk area, but because he's across that state line, sometimes it's harder to get him looked at. Do you find those same struggles as a head coach there in Perquimans?
I can see it, as far as schools coming into the building. And, like I said, I watched Coach Biggie, and he kind of hit it on the head. It's a lot easier to fly into Norfolk Airport and go to, I think Norfolk has 8 high schools, than it is to, come across the state line and you hit Elizabeth, or you hit, Pasquotank, Northeastern, those schools, and then you got to drive another 25, 30 minutes to get to us. We had obviously a class, our 25 class was pretty good football players. So we have 6 going to play college football at a 9. In my opinion, yes, it's an extra challenge, but to be able to, help facilitate the recruiting process for those kids, it just, in my head, I just have to hustle a little bit more. Whether it be sending emails with highlight tapes or, messaging coaches on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, all those things to kind of get the conversation going. And then, they may not come into the building, but they can see highlight tapes. They can see, transcripts. They can see all these things to be able to make as good of a decision on, the recruiting process as they can. And, I kind of take the mindset of recruiting during COVID when it comes to, talking to college coaches here, just because, obviously they couldn't come into our schools and things like that during COVID. So, we've had a good amount of schools coming in, but a lot of them that, I've talked to coaches for our players, trying to get them around here is, it's a little bit more difficult. So, we've been lucky enough to be able to get in communication with a good amount of coaches, and be able to get our kids' names out there and their tapes and stuff like that. So, yes, it's more difficult, but, just in my opinion, to try and get a kid to go to college and, hopefully be taken care of and his family taken care of, I put more ownership on myself when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll close with this. And, I was listening to you talk, and, I've enjoyed watching you build a program. And hey, who says you can't go back to a school twice? I met you, I think it was 2016 or 17 when you were the head coach, and then you went back to Virginia. Now here you are, and you're having tremendous success. So obviously it's showing your growth, not only just as a coach, but, a leader, and coming back and just doing some really cool things. So I applaud you for that. But here you're talking about these young men, and you mentioned Tarboro as kind of being that standard with Coach Craddock in Northeastern North Carolina. How do you try to build your staffs? Do you try to get young men who graduated and played for the school to come back and become teachers and coaches in the community, or is that kind of something that you look to do? Because in my travels here this past few weeks, it's becoming glaringly obvious that a lot of coaches this day are trying to, instead of going out and hiring coaches from far away, they're trying to keep people that grew up in that program and help build that program to be part of the staffs moving forward. Do you kind of employ that same philosophy?
For us, it's in coming from Virginia, you hit it. I think it's a little bit more difficult, to find coaches. Being a one high school county, it's more difficult to have teaching jobs and things like that. I have two coaches and myself, obviously, who have been with me the last 3 years. My defensive coordinator, Dale Mallory, who I think it could take a head coaching job tomorrow and do a great job. And my offensive line coach, Tyler Burns. The three of us have been together since we got back. And I'm holding on to them too as long and as hard as I possibly can. But to answer your question, I think the community guys are big, and not necessarily in the sense of building the program where, with Perquimans specifically, there's been a lot of change in head coaches. I think Coach Ari was probably here the longest, over, I don't know, as long as I can remember, and knowing Perquimans and things like that. I think he was here for 5 years. So, that turnover, I think, has made it more difficult as far as, consistency for our kids. And if you really look at it and you look at the kind of guys who we've been able to bring in to coach, Coach Terry Johnson is another one who's been with us the last 2 years. Some community guys, but a mix of guys who, I try to have a relationship with, whether it be, prior to coming back here or whatever the case is. But Amarion Hunter is another one who went to UNC Pembroke and played football there, and is coming back home and is going to come help us coach. He's going to coach receivers for us, so I'm extremely excited about. So I think there's a fine line between too many community coaches, for lack of a better way to say it. Just because, if you get into it, you're having to teach your culture, you're having to teach all these things. And some of them, to be quite honest, may not like it because it's not what they saw Perquimans football at.
Yeah, I agree.
So, some of those conversations with those community guys are a little bit more difficult. And we try, obviously I'm respectful about, how we do things and stuff like that. But, it's always good to have community guys, in my opinion, because a lot of the time, especially a school like Perquimans, they've known those kids since they were young, or their family, or whatever the case is. So I try to have a good amount of community guys on our staff, and it's done really well for us.
Yeah. And you can see I had put up the graphic here from the Carolina Preps team pages that, of a lot of the coaches that's come through, and there have been some good coaches that have come through, but they've never really had that coach that stayed for a great amount of time. You had a few guys coming through, but I think that shows that you can really establish something too. And, I expect to see your name moving up the list for wins and the accolades and stuff that you deserve for the program you're building.
I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. Our family, I have a 4-year-old son now. And, when we were looking at coming back here, it kind of came down to who are the kind of people that we wanted to raise our son around.
Amen.
Our athletic director, Justin Robertson, is one of my best friends. My family and his family, my son loves his son, and his baby daughter and his wife are, some of the best people I've ever met. And they were a big part in, the conversation of us wanting to come back here because, we knew that if we brought our son back or two here, because he wasn't born when we were here the first time, if we brought him here, we were going to be able to raise them the right way and put them
Yeah.
around kind of people who, have the same values as us. So, like I said, we love being back here and looking to continue to build this thing, and know we still have a long way to go, but we're looking forward to seeing it from, the beginning to the fall, and, how everything goes, moving forward.
Yeah. Now you couldn't have said some things better myself, or I could have said some things better myself that, following your sentiments, I even look back, my thoughts on high school football have certainly changed a little bit over the years. I've always, my whole life, as far back as I can remember, I've been involved in football and high school football. And, this is all I've ever wanted to do, is be a part of it. And the mission of Carolina Preps is always greater than just the X's and O's and who wins and records and coaching records and so on and so forth. I've always, and even dating back to when I was coaching some 20 years ago now, it seems like, football is just that vehicle that brings communities together. It's the fabric of the communities. It helps the young men go and become, either coaches or leaders or businessmen and definitely husbands and fathers. And that's what's important with football these days. And just kind of echoes everything you said. And, even myself 20 years ago when I started Carolina Preps, I was just chasing, who's the next best coach or whatever, the next best player. But, when you're now almost 50 years old, you realize, football is just so much bigger than the game on Friday night. And, it can, this game and everything around it can make communities better and families better and just everything else.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I'm extremely blessed that I get to learn from two of the best coaches in the state every day. And Christy Thatch, our volleyball coach, and Justin Robertson, our baseball coach and athletic director. There isn't something program wise or culture wise that they haven't seen or done. And I get to pick their brain from, 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock every single day. So,
Yep.
Like I said, we're extremely blessed to be here and, to be able to be hopefully that level of consistency that, our kids and our community deserve and build this thing the right way. I tell everybody our mission statement is to put a product on the field that Perquimans County can be proud of. It's that simple.
There you go.
And we're striving to do it every day, and we're going to keep trying.
Absolutely. Well, Coach Rapanick, I appreciate your time. You're gracious with me to get on here and talk about your program. I appreciate you. I know your county and everybody in your community does as well. And anytime you want to come on, you're certainly a friend of us here at Carolina Preps. If we can help promote your program in any way, let us know. But good luck here as you embark on the spring football. And hopefully you have a great 25 season. And if we can do anything for you to promote you, please let us know.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We appreciate everything you do for the kids in our state, and we're excited to have you back.
Well, thank you.
Yes, sir.